Hello, guys. Welcome back again. If you're just joining us to this yet another SEMrush webinar. So if you've been to my webinars before, then you know what the next 5 minutes are going to look like. If you haven't been to one of my webinars before, then what's wrong with you? Today I'm here with Nick Ellison. He's the man in the headphones, the dashing man with the glasses. I'm going to introduce him in 5 minutes, so stay tuned for that. But everybody, if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to this webinar series. What we do is on a weekly basis, well, I say on a bi-weekly basis, every couple of weeks, we talk to ultimately agency owners of various kinds who are scaling and have built successful businesses. So Nick Ellison, of course, falls into that category. Hello, Josh. Hello, Joshua Hawkins. How you doing, my friend? Do let us know where you're tuning in from, what country, what city, as well as what your occupation is maybe. And if you've got a particular question that you want to ask us, then do go ahead and ask it in the comments. Whether you do or whether you don't, I've got a ton of questions I want to ask Nick. Actually, we've got a really interesting webinar today. It's all about and focused upon building and scaling ultimately an agency via 3 areas, which is your personal network, looking at the white label model, as well as business that is won via referrals, which obviously implies that you need to be actually good at what you do. So we're going to be talking to Nick about all of those things. So for those of you who are just joining, please do leave some comments in the chat. And we've got Carl who's just joined. Hey, Carl, how you doing? So you're from Chicago. You run a healthcare-focused marketing agency. Fantastic. Looking forward to getting some questions from yourself, Carl, as well as Joshua, who's in the audience as well. So yeah, guys, I'll just give it another couple of minutes to let people come in and also see if I look so fantastically bright at the moment, don't I? And we've got Josh, he runs an SEO agency. No surprises there. We've got Swapnil, who's just come in. So Swapnil, if I've got your name pronounced right, hopefully that's okay. Do let us know where you're from, what country, what city, what work it is that you do, and please do drop any questions that you've got in the actual comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're watching on, well, anywhere else, to be honest with you. Yeah, Josh, absolutely. So guys, yeah, as I was saying, we've got Nick here from the Purr Group, and we're going to be focusing again, if you've just joined, about how Nick has built a really, really successful agency that, you know, I've known Nick for those of you who are wondering, since I was, God, so technically we were at the same university at 18 years old, and I'm now 15 years. So we've got some more people coming in. We've got Christina. Hey, Christina, how you doing? It's Christine. I'm going to just try and pronounce your name. Christina. And now Nick is ironically a better probably Italian speaker than I am, but Christina Libal Mariconti from New Jersey. Let us know, Christina. I do know where New Jersey's from, of course, but do let us know what you do, what your occupation is, and what you're looking for in this webinar. Hey, Rob, how you doing, my friend? You're ahead of the game, Rob. Toronto, Canada, and you run a marketing agency, websites and SEO. We've got Puneet who's just joined from is that Indore? Nick, do you know where that is in India? I've never heard of Indore before.
Just indoors.
Yeah,
it's just inside a building.
Probably that. So guys, keep your messages coming in. We've got Sabiha, we've got Lee Scarf joining, we've got Swapnil joining, we've got Vacation Club Loans. I know that's not your real name, Vacation Club Loans. So for everybody who's still just joining, we are coming into we'll give it 2 more minutes. Maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. Please do let us know. Thank you, Sabiha. Let us know where you're from. That means city as well as country or district, as well as letting us know what your occupation is, and letting us know also what it is potentially that you're looking for from this webinar. So we've got Frederick in here from Ottawa, Canada. He runs a web design agency. Brilliant. So Fred, we're going to be talking a lot about Nick's business, of which web design is a huge part of it. And we've got Ankit as well. Ankit, glad to have you back. You said, I'm here again in another webinar. So fantastic. I'm glad that you're back. So guys, it looks like everyone's coming up. Hello, 33 Big Money. Good to have you back, sir. Hello, Paul. Paul, how you doing, buddy? So we've got, of course, some of the regulars. Paul's from Sandhurst. I didn't even know actually that you were from Sandhurst, Paul. So yeah, we've got a lot of comments coming in. We've got Mayor. He's one of my team that's here, so I know what Mayor does. He does SEO at Pearl Lemon. It's good to see. Linda, Ankit, Christina. Good. We've got a really active audience. It looks like. So we've got Christina, who's been perfect in SEO for 7 years, starting a local SEO agency. So, guys, we've officially hit there or thereabouts the 5-minute mark. So, for those of you who are with us and are just joining us, I'd like to introduce to you Nick Ellison. Nick Ellison runs a very successful agency called the Purr Group, and I've known him for around 15 years right now. We're going to be talking about really getting some advice from Nick about how he's built his agency via personal networks, via the white label model, as well as winning referral business. And what I want to do and begin with, Nick, is just by introducing the audience for the next 5 to 10 minutes to Nick Ellison, as well as to the Purr Group. And that probably will be a fantastic place for the audience to get to know you, buddy.
Brilliant. Yes. Well, thanks for having me on, Deepak, and Anton and the rest of the Semrush team. It's my first ever webinar. So you're getting
Premier
fully new material. It's all new. Well, I guess it's worth saying a little bit about what Purr is and does first, and then returning to the beginning before coming back to the end at other points to give wider context. So Purr is at its heart a development agency. Specializing in development, we do the development behind websites, behind apps, behind internal software for companies, all sorts of things like that. And we ended up with that niche via a relatively roundabout way. But relatively recently, we reached a kind of interesting stage of our development where we'd grown the business really successfully through the methods you talked about, through referrals, through personal network, through white labeling. And we got the business to a certain stage where it was then about growing to a different level and trying to move away from that model. So what's going to be hopefully interesting today is talking about how I took it from being a one-man band, a freelancer, just coder in my bedroom, and turning that into a 15-person business where it needed to then move to the next stage, and it being more about direct clients, being repositioning and growing into a bigger beast, because all of these methods work really well, and they work well for certain size agencies and for certain models out there. But I think what I'm able to hopefully share today is a bit of the story about why that worked for me and why that worked for me at a certain stage of business and type of business. So to give a little background on, is it worth sort of talking about me personally first, Deepak?
Yeah,
we'll
I definitely think so. Let's let the audience know a little bit about who Nick Ellison is in general. I think that's a good place, and then we can start delving into the Purr Group and all of the bits in between. So absolutely,
perfect. Yeah, lovely. Well, so born and raised in London, and I guess my life didn't really start until I met a man called Deepak Shukla at age about 19. We were at university together at Warwick in England. Deepak was studying English literature, which has always amazed me because he can't put a comma in the right place to save his life.
That's true. That's true. Nick has saved me with my lack of grammar many a time.
Very good. And I was studying engineering, so I wasn't exactly development focused, but I had a wider technology interest. And somehow those two disciplines allowed us to end up in the height of a recession, getting both somehow managing to land quite desirable summer vacation scheme internships in the city at Deloitte. And we somehow latched on to each other and have stayed good friends ever since. But we both went into this very sort of corporate world, and Deepak was the only person who lasted less time than I did. I think Deepak lasted 3 months. I lasted 9 months. I'd already managed to set up a business before joining, but it was a difficult time. 2009, I think, was when we were joining, and the economy was in a bit of a difficult situation. Over the nearly a year I was there, I managed to grow that business, and it was a technology business that provided software to events, big student events, and we grew that business, and I taught myself to code pretty well. And after a year of doing that, was able to leave the city, and after for another year, we were able to sell that business and move on. And I had this kind of pause at that point, having sold a business that I didn't leave with a very clear exit plan. I knew I kind of had enjoyed learning the technology stuff, but I didn't have much of a wider understanding of the industry or of startup culture. Startup culture was quite new, I guess, at that point in the UK. There was a few people involved, and it wasn't the big happening scene that it has grown to be in the last decade. So there was a bit of networking and going out to meet people. And at the time, there was still quite a big agency culture, and a lot of the people who were talking about development, web development, app development were agencies, probably more than startups at that point. So I thought, well, let's go and get a bit of agency experience. And I went and got a job at a company called Reading Room, who were a pretty big, big name digital agency in London at the time. I lasted 3 months before I got sacked because of a disagreement about something very, very trivial. And that was the last time I worked or had a job working for someone else. So that was back
what year
in
was
2011.
that? Okay,
2011.
so 9 years. 9 years.
So yeah, I've had a job for less than a year since university. So that's been a nice what is it now?
Good
11
record.
years. Exactly, completely unemployable. And so once you've made yourself completely unemployable, you work out that you need to find a way of making a living otherwise. Also at that time, I did go through the whole sort of army officer entry process and nearly ended up in Sandhurst, where one of your viewers is from today. I know Deepak's had his own sort of brief military career as well. But yeah, decided at whatever point that wasn't the route I was going to take. I developed a little bit of a niche doing some consulting for some people on development projects, but really didn't have much of a wider understanding of how I was going to grow it or turn it into something. Like I said, I had only 3 months experience working in an agency, and that was in a sales job. I knew how to code, but I'd never worked as part of a development team. My sort of DevOps skills, or that you'd refer to them nowadays, were pretty poor. I'd never, just because I was working in isolation so much of the time, I was, just writing code for my own purposes, not for other people's consumption, not writing tests, not committing code properly. And it was pretty scrappy work. But with literally no preparation or understanding of how I was going to do it, that was the start of my business model. And what happened was I knew I needed to turn it into a company. I'd had a company before. I knew that just kind of consulting doesn't really mean anything. Yes, you've got your personal brand, but to build an entity is better. To have a name is stronger. And to start with, I was very keen that it wasn't just me starting it. So I had a couple of friends who did complementary things, and we'd work together as freelancers for a particular client. One guy came from a marketing background, one guy came from a design background, and I was the tech guy. And we thought, perfect. Whoever has thought of combining these three disciplines into a single company? That's marvelous. And so we spent the evening trying to pick out names, and we put names in a hat and went to a pub, and we're talking to girls and asking them to pick names out of hats and things like that. Didn't lead to anything. And the next day I thought, I do remember that old friend. And it's a guy that Deepak and I both know from our past called Russell, who once bet me that I wouldn't call my next company something to do with Panther, and that's a very long story behind why that was the case. But I couldn't get pantherdigital.com, but I could get purrdigital.com. And that was about as much thought as I put into the name at that point. So we got purrdigital.com, and that became the name of the agency. We did about a month of work just setting up bank accounts and getting registered and coming up with a brand. And then the other two guys bailed almost immediately. And I think this is a really common story for anyone starting an agency or a company of any sort, is that nearly always, by the time you've actually got everything set up, one of the people who was involved in the planning of it moves away. Yeah, and I think it doesn't work out for whatever reason.
I think that's a really important point, everybody, that Nick has raised upon. One of the things, as we go on to discuss with Nick, that I've found exciting about his business that we haven't had yet with the chaps that I've interviewed is it's two things. The first thing that Nick has just identified is you've got to be prepared to go it alone. Nick started off with several partners. Nick and I have been partners, which Nick will go on to touch upon actually. And somehow we can't avoid each other because we remain friends still. And it's often not the case with partnerships that don't quite work out. But I think a big thing about this space is that you've got to be prepared to kind of take that step. And it's something that I know Nick has done time and time again. I'm really looking forward, Nick, with that in mind, to delving into the journey of the Purr Group. So everybody, please do ask your questions. I've got the specific 3 areas that I definitely want to cover with you. So Nick, what I always have, and guys, as you know, I've known Nick, I've known about the Purr Group since the beginning. Our story predates that. What I would love to understand more, and it's, I think, something that people don't do a good enough job of, surprisingly, a lot of the time. How do you feel you've managed to cultivate relationships within your personal network that have allowed you to generate business business with people that because it has happened in some instances. And I just want to understand more about, quarantines are probably, a good example of someone that, you met along your journey. But I'd love to, understand more about, how one should approach personal networks, what your experience of it has been, and why you felt in your case it's worked, because a lot of people go straight for an outreach approach, and yours has been a little bit different.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point to hit on, and I think what the really necessary thing to remember is that it's actually bloody hard, and it's really not an easy place to be when you are a sole founder, when you are the sole person doing sales, marketing, delivery, project management, all of it, and you're also trying to sell to people and service people and the opportunity to spoil relationships or to upset people that you do care about, or all of those things. The pressure is so high, and it actually gets easier.
And this is something I've been really scared about, because I would be very scared of taking on your business and then doing a bad job. So I know I probably interrupted, but I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on both points.
Yeah, so I guess when I started, it was who's in my network, who has companies, who knows people at companies, who works in marketing departments, and you put your name out there, and it's difficult when you're a freelancer and you're operating under your own name. It gets a little better once you've established a company and you're just the representative of the company. It gets easier, but again, you're only in this world. You're only as good as the case studies or the credentials you have.
Yeah,
people will always go, "Oh, show me some other examples of work," and that it gets easier because you're able to build up more, but the pressure is so high to begin with. And so I think it's really important to only do things that you are really comfortable doing, even if that does mean that, the growth of the company will be slower. Just develop the relationships, develop happy clients who are, able to be advocates for you, who are going to keep spending money with you, who are going to recommend you, and people will see, oh, that's good, high quality work. Like, it might not be the best paid stuff, it might not be the most glamorous, but just build enough of a base so that you've got regular repeat income coming in from people who you've not mucked up the work for and are continuing to use you and trust you. Don't just kind of go, oh, I'll take on a design project, oh, I'll take on an SEO project, oh, I'll take on X, Y, and Z. Try and not stretch yourselves too far, because sooner or later you'll realize, I'm not actually very good at that thing. I'm over servicing that guy, I'm under servicing that one, and suddenly I've got a really unsustainable business where I can't scale it up, because suddenly I need to hire people in 10 different disciplines to do so. And what you keep on coming back to in this world is that whether it's developing of your personal brand or not, that you're always having to replace yourself within a business. And so you start off being the guy doing the delivery, the sales, the marketing, everything, and the sooner you can replace yourself in the delivery front, and just be the sales and marketing guy, the better. Because and I know we've all been there, the day that you're the delivery guy and the sales guy and the project manager, you're too close to it. You have to have more heads on it. You have to be able to see things from a perspective of quality review or feedback,
and how does that work
and being detached from it.
With in your instance, sorry to interrupt, I'm curious, how does that work if you're doing work for and with somebody that you know within your personal network, or rather a recommendation from, so I'm Deepak, I'm like, someone asked me and I'm like, you know what, I'll introduce you to Nick. Nick's great. Isn't there an expectation that you can't remove yourself from a project when you're doing it for somebody that you know?
I think my business improved significantly the moment I realized that I am literally the worst person to ask to do something. Like, it obviously, hopefully I'm not, but if you ask me to, I can do the delivery, but I can't do the delivery and the sales, or the sales and the marketing and the project management. And so the sooner I realized that there are better people in my team at delivery than me, that was when growth really took off. Is because I suddenly wasn't the bottleneck. You're not waiting for me to finish looking at emails or going to a meeting before delivery work happens. So I think there's a lot of reticence when you bring in a personal network customer in the early days of a business to pass it off to someone else. But unless you find the tipping point where you've not only you're not only able to do it, but you've got to do it, then you'll never grow, and you'll always be the guy who's working 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, and never trust anyone else to build your business along with you. Because it's so draining personally, and the stakes are so high, and one mistake and then let's say you have a server go down or something's a problem for one client, you can't service another client, and you just become so reactive that it's impossible to balance a business. And I got really, really lucky with my first hire. There's a guy called Rob Morrisby who still works with me today. He's left my employment, but still, works with me as a contractor. But it took me a long time trying to hire that first person. And especially when you're starting from effectively net zero. When I started the company, I'd splurged all the money I'd earned from selling my first company. I was kind of desperately fiddling around on credit cards, trying to keep myself afloat.
One of the things
I need to make some money.
Guys, one of the things I want to highlight with why what's really interesting about what Nick's saying and how he's communicating. I mean, I want to outline a couple of things. Now, I've got an unfair advantage because I've known Nick for several years, and I've also seen it as someone who's been both a business partner with him, but also have been, watching it grow from the outside. So one of the things I think that has been so successful, and this also, because we're going to take a question now, Nick, actually. So Carl White on the screen, if we bring up Carl's question, Anton, one of the questions that Carl's asked is, Nick, how would you break down your new business acquisition across your networks, across, personal networks, white labels and referrals? And before you answer that question, Nick, what I want to say to that question, Carl, and just as a generalization, is that what's been really interesting is Nick cares hugely, of course, about quality. And that is never more exemplified by the decision to say no to certain projects and understanding where your skills are and not diversifying into several different areas, which is very, very often the route that a lot of kind of full service agencies do, but then delivery suffers as a consequence. So I think that what I have noticed, that the power of saying no, Nick, that you do it really effectively, you pick your projects. Two, that you have got, as much as you say that the last thing that you need is delivery. Nick has delivered websites for me back in the day before we were even partners, when I needed some support. But I feel that level of care can help you build an incredibly strong referral-only business as well, when you actually grow a little bit slower than agencies that are very hard-headed on growth, but then they experience a lot of churn because they just don't deliver, and that almost you can then over time just choose to grow through referral only because you deliver such a good quality of work. And it's a very traditional approach that's clearly still really, really strong. And I think that's one of the things that I've always kind of admired about your business. So Nick, I'd love for you to answer Carl's question with all of that in mind. So just asking about the breakdown of your business across those three channels.
Well, first of all, I'll caveat it by saying that things have moved on a little bit because we're not so referral reliant now. It's a big part of what we do, but we do have more of an outbound marketing reach and a new business drive now. And I'll come on to the reasons for that later. But certainly during the first 5-6 years of my business, I would say that in general, 80%, something like that, was at the referral level on average in most years. Now, that could be, I'm not going to blur the line too much between what was referral and through personal, direct personal network and agency white label, because often referral can mean agency to agency. And we were getting sort of resold by one agency, and then another agency would go, oh, do you know anyone who does this? And then they would make a good recommendation. So yes, it might be a white label job, but it would still come through a referral basis. The other thing to consider is that agencies go bust. They're sold. They merge. People leave. People stay in a job for a couple of years. And we had an interesting example a couple of years ago where an agency went bust. And I think it led to 4 or 5 other agency partnerships as a result, because everyone at that agency we'd worked with at their new jobs took us with them. So our split was roughly sort of 80-20 in terms of things that were being driven directly through people I'd met or through existing personal network, and then referrals from people we'd already worked with or agencies we'd already worked with.
Okay, brilliant. So 80%, an 80% referral based business for me, I find. I mean, and for those of you wondering, Nick has run I know that a high six-figure business. He's got, I think, your biggest stage had 15 full-time employees. I think, was it 13 or 15?
Yeah, something like that.
And sustaining that level of growth through referrals is really, really, impressive with that in mind. And I want to go back a step, because Sabia has asked an actual really, really interesting question. Sabia's got a question that relates to something you referred to, Nick, in the earlier days of the business. So the question that Sabia asked, Anton, if you can bring it up on screen, about the transition. So she asks, let's see if Anton.
Yeah, how much money do you need to have? So
guys, if you've not seen the question yet, because I know that's not on the screen, there you go. So guys, the question is, how much money do you need to have to have made to transition between a consultant to establishing a company? So Nick, I'd love to get your answer on that.
Two different answers, effectively. One is that the establishing of the company differs depending on the country you're in. Different countries have got different rules about establishing companies, and how much money you need to have in the bank, or resources behind you, or whether you've got, for example, if I want to start a company in America, it's almost impossible for me as a UK citizen without being without having a green card, and some money in the bank over there. Whereas in England, it's pretty straightforward. It's a 10-minute form I fill out online and I've got a company. So the company bit I won't necessarily answer too directly, because that's more of like a legal accountancy question rather than an agency question. In terms of where you go from being one man to being a team, there's a slightly different answer, which is that I would say to feel comfortable, you try and have 3 months burn rate in the bank for the amount of team members that you've got, so salaries and overhead of doing so. Again, one of the things that often makes life easier for early agencies is you don't take on the overheads like expensive offices, or you're able to add another seat to your co-working place rather than take on a larger office space overall. So you don't necessarily need to take on a ton of additional fixed cost overheads, but it is advisable to try and put money in the bank before you join them. Now, that's really difficult in the early stages, where you're trying to earn money for yourself, not just earn money for other people, not earn money for other people as well. And my rule in the early days was, if I'd found I was doing more than one all-nighter in a month, that probably meant I needed to hire someone else. So I'd say in my earlier days, it was less, I need to have money in the bank before I hire them, and it was more necessity. But what I realized in retrospect was because that was only really because I was massively underselling my services and I was charging way too little. So as much as it's a case of how much money do I need to have in the bank, stop thinking I'm a consultant. Start thinking I am a business. I am an employee or a representative of that business. And the moment you're charging for the business, not for yourself, you realize that you're putting the money aside faster anyway.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And I think having that transition in terms of mindset and therefore approach that you're selling your company services is a big thing that Nick hit upon. So we've had a flurry of questions that have come in. Nick, you probably can see them in the comments. So some really, really good ones. So we're going to go through them one at a time. So Jayesh, if we bring up that question, Jayesh, it's a really good question that you're asking, and it relates to that 80% referral only figure. He's of course asking for the keys to the kingdom. So, Mr. Nick Ellison, can you share
step-by-step blueprint?
Over to you, sir.
I think one of the really interesting things to talk about is that often you'll see like some referral scheme. Here's the incentive to refer me, being banded around. And I'd say in all my years of doing this, I've never once had anyone go, I saw your referral scheme advertised and I'll send work to you. I mean, motivated people, if you communicate with them that there's a commission available, if work comes your way, that's going to incentivize them. But it's not something I've advertised without it being a discussion. So it's always been a case of just speaking to as many people as possible, making them aware of what you do, and making them aware that referral bonus or commission is available if work is brought to you that's commercially viable. One of the hard things is when you're starting off, and this is a big part of the previous question about how you transition from a one-man band to a company, is that you'll nearly always have been charging too little. And when someone comes back to you 2 years later and they realize that you're now 4 times the price or whatever it was that you were before, sometimes some people don't keep up with that, and so there are lots of referrals you go, sadly that's not going to work for us, and appreciated it, but this isn't the right sort of work for us, and best of luck to you. And it's about culturing or developing relationships with people who charge more than you do, who do a better quality of job than you do, who have big exposure to bigger clients than you do. And we were cheeky about it. We'd do things like, if let's say we took over a website from someone else.
Yeah.
Whatever, companies sacked their agency, and we now look at the website and we look at the code, and we realize that it wasn't them that built it. It was their outsourced development team. I can then go back to the agency and say, or the original agency, and say, sorry that it didn't work out for you on this one. Just so you know, we're around in the future if you ever want to do this sort of work. The previous guys did a great job, but here's how we would have done it differently. And that actually might have meant that you were still involved in, because we don't do design. We're just going to do, we work in partnership. And that actually led to more work for us. We're still working with a number of agencies that we won by poaching them off their original people where they'd lost the work in the first place. Yeah. So
that's incredible.
But it has to be very targeted. The moment you start approaching partners or people who could refer you that are going to be threatened by you, it doesn't work. So it has to evolve as the company evolves. Suddenly, as a 15-person development team, if I start approaching 2-man creative partnerships, they'll go, well, why would we send it to you? We can use a freelancer, someone more at our scale, unless the quality of their work is so high that they don't care about it. They're earning big day rates or consultancy fees, and it doesn't matter to them. So it's about trying to evolve the offering and match the kind of people that you're partnering with. So much of developing a really good referral strategy or a partner strategy should be about ensuring that the kind of people you want to work with, because often they're working with the kind of clients you'd like to work with. And I remember we had an early partnership with an SEO agency who I thought, you guys have absolutely nailed it. And they gave me a little presentation about the kind of agencies they were looking to partner with. And they said, we like working with companies that are in London and Southeast England regions. They probably got somewhere between 1 million and 10 million turnover. They've got a small marketing team with a marketing manager and a marketing exec maybe, or up to 5 people. They work in these industries. And I thought, how specialized is that? If you're able to say the kind of clients you want to work with, you're probably also going to identify the sort of agencies you want to work with. And suddenly you start developing a network of people like you, motivated by the same things, who aren't trying to do everything, who are specialists in their fields and are happy to make recommendations to other people who are seen as specialists in their fields, who have good reputations, who aren't slated on online reviews, that sort of thing.
Nick, I'm going to have to stop you there, because there's so much value, guys, in what Nick has just said. I want to go through several things. First of all, Anton in the private chat said to me, Deepak, we've got a dozen or so more, maybe even more than that, people that have just joined. So guys, if you've just joined, please do say hello in the comments. Please let us know what country you're from, what city you're from, what is your occupation, and maybe a burning question that you've got. I see that there's questions that continue to come in. So if you're joining us, we're talking to Nick Ellison, who's the founder of the Purr Group, about how to build a very successful agency through personal networks, through white label growth, as well as referral-only business. And we'll be talking a little bit about Nick's also new business drive that the Purr Group are engaged in. But what I want to go back to is some of Nick's comments about how to build a really strong referral-only actual business. Because, as much as there's a big focus upon outbound and growth and all of these elements, there's a couple of things that I think that Nick said are really, really important. So first of all, Nick said it originally that Nick has a core specialism in the development space, okay? So in that way, when you look for referrals, it's important to self-identify and that someone can easily pinpoint what you do as a business. So I do think that what you can infer from that is that if you're a full service, or you position yourself as a full service digital agency, it's going to be very much more difficult for you to then try and build an alignment with another agency, because they're going to look at you as competition. So Nick's case, that doesn't happen. That was the first thing. The second thing that Nick spoke about, and this is not in the order, but he did mention it, which I thought was really, really important advice, is that there's got to be an alignment in terms of size of business. So one of the things that Nick spoke about the growth of his business is that, his rates naturally change when you realize you're undercharging, your own overheads grow, your expertise grow, and then potentially people that like Deepak's rates or expectations of Nick's rates don't keep up with what Nick does. So there needs to be an alignment in terms of the size of business that you're approaching, as well as them having a different specialism to what you do. And then the final third thing that Nick spoke about with this SEO agency, and this is something that we should all steal, right? That is definitely a blueprint, I think, that everybody should nick from Nick, is that he spoke about the SEO agency that he met that said, it sounds like they had a slide deck, but fundamentally they were clear. Yeah, exactly. That's the first time I've heard of a business going on to try and build a partnership and to say, hey, we this is the size of agency that we want to work with. This is, what that agency makeup is composed of. This is the ideal client that business kind of has. And these things, I mean, I've not done it, guys. Please do in the comments say, I've done that. But this is the first time that I've really thought about building successful partnerships in that way. So, I think that was incredible advice from Nick, and we're going to continue with some of the questions that we've got here. So I think the next question we're going to take is Ankit's question. So if you can bring up Ankit's question, Anton, I want to move on to a little bit of the white label, and I think in a way you may have just kind of answered this, Nick, but I think that a lot of people in the audience, and we spoke about this off air, of course, Nick, want to try and establish building a white label relationship with a bigger agency, actually, of course, because then the economics of scale makes sense. If you're 2-man and you can supply to 8-man or 10-man, it makes sense. But for the most part, including probably, myself, I think, there's been times where I've got it wrong. What's your advice for anybody who's listening who thinks I'd love to be a SEO agency or whatever agency who outsources to a bigger agency that has bigger clients? What's been your experience of it, and what advice do you have for the audience?
It's a tricky one. White labeling is an incredibly sort of powerful way of growing a business, but it doesn't work consistently. I don't think that, or at least it didn't for us. And I think it's worth considering why we've tried to reduce our dependence on white labeling, and why we're only really white labeled for a few people now. It was far more the case to begin with. And part of that is because our own presence has grown and our reputation has grown, and you realize that people are, one of the reasons that someone would consider white labeling you rather than just reselling you and taking a commission bonus is because they're worried about the risk to their reputation. They're worried about, let's say I introduce Pearl Lemon to a client and and I don't feel as though you've done a good enough job for my client. Suddenly I've taken a personal hit in doing so, in making that recommendation. Yeah. Whereas if if you've done if I've white labeled you and I'm doing some project management over you and I can assess the quality, then I've got a bit more control over it. And yes, it's costing me more money, and I'm probably beating you down on price. But it's not. It's a good way of getting in with an agency, but generally, longer term, it's better to try and find a way of working together that isn't white label and is more about referral and commission work, that sort of thing.
Let's break that up into 2 buckets. Let's focus on the guys who perhaps don't intend to build the Purr brand and want to take perhaps the white label route as a way of building their business. So maybe we can focus this on 2 segments.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that white label topic, I think something to remember and to ensure that you try and build this into your process is that just because someone is white labeling you, just because an agency has a bigger presence or better clients or more money than you, does not mean they have any idea how to do your job better than you. And certainly we've had experiences in the past where we were being white labeled by an agency, but effectively had to write their account management emails to their clients for them because their understanding of technical work or of how the process works was so poor that they were so reliant on you. And it's normally at that point where they realize maybe we should actually just be making an introduction because we're just losing time and money, managing this process. The other side to consider is that normally what happens if you've been white labeled is that unless you're lucky enough to have been brought in from the off, like through the sales process, through the pitch process, whatever it is, that you've got so little control over what's actually been agreed, to be delivered within the scope of work. The budget's already been set, and suddenly you're told, here's the budget, here's the deliverables, make it work. And that's always a really difficult point to come from. You're told your constraints, time, money, and what's got to be achieved. And it's just, well, do the work. Not an opportunity to say, well, if you want to have all of that, it's going to take longer, or it's going to cost more money, or whatever the compromise needs to be. So the sooner you can build a relationship with a client where they understand that you need to be involved, not just in delivery and white labeling, but in account management, in sales, in everything down to like the marketing level. That's the sort of white labeling relationship for us that's been successful historically. And it's just the quality of the conversations that you're having and the regularity and how closely you work as businesses. Because I would always say to an agency that, let's say we're going to work with a new one, I would say, look, we can be white labeled for you, but unless we are going to commit to putting a ton of effort into it from both sides to get to know each other's companies, to be so close that we are effectively the same team anyway, that it's probably not going to work. So, and making them aware of that early on is probably a better way of doing it, because they don't want to discover it later on when you've sent an email on their email account that's upset a client. So as long as you have a structured process for, look, this is how we will be white labeled for you. These will be, you will provide us email addresses. We will have a phone number that's answered in your name. We will abide by these ways of doing things. This is how we will run sales. This is how we will run account management, and all those things as processes rather than just we're now part of your team. And I think the more you can share up front with a company about what it is that you do as a partner or a referral, the better. So even now, when referrals isn't as big a part of our business as it was, I still have a deck ready that the moment anyone introduces me to a new agency, I send it over and they can see exactly the way we work with partners, and all the ways that we say, well, look, white labeling is an option, and here's the costs in doing so, but you might want to not consider it. It just depends.
Guys, I think that again, Nick has said some really interesting points that I want to take a moment to highlight. So for those of you in the audience who are looking at the white label approach, in Nick commenting clearly through experience of the things it sounds like you've learned, Nick, along your journey of white labeling, about being fully embedded in the sales, marketing, and potentially account management process, and getting ultimately, the phone number, the dedicated email, building those pieces into a white label deck is probably a very, very effective way to demonstrate your skills as an actual white label potential partner. Because for those who do have an overflow of business, making sure that there's that level of consistency is huge. And I think in being able to educate your partner as to how you work when you white label, and having that quantity of information, because guys, I've been asked if we white label at Pearl Lemon, and I've not had a deck like that. And whilst I perhaps answered a question relatively well when I've been put on the spot, it is certainly not the case that I can go through those series of points that Nick has just identified. And I think that having something like that as part of your sales process, if you will, when you're outreaching to bigger agencies to say, we'd love to be a white label partner, I'd imagine is quite powerful. So I'd love, with that in mind, Nick, for you to, before we continue with some of these questions, to briefly comment upon how did these white label partnerships come about anyway in the beginning, and anything you've got to say on that point.
Of course, yeah. I think just one other point I want to come on mention on the how you advertise your services as a potential white label supplier is that part of our core message has always been, if asked by a client of yours, we're not going to lie. We're never going to say, oh no, of course, we're part of the same company, we work at the same desks. It is, no, we're a partner company, we work under the same brand, but the businesses are very aligned, and we do things in a way that means that we're one on the same team. And I think that's a better answer than going, oh yeah, I've got a fake name on LinkedIn that you can check. Don't try and represent something that you aren't. You are a person, and you are in a different city or whatever. That doesn't matter, because you've put this process in place and you've got this understanding between you as companies.
Yep.
It's no good if someone calls up their main office and goes, "Oh, can I speak to Deepak?" And they go, "We don't have a Deepak. I can't transfer you to Deepak," and that doesn't look good to the client either. So it's got to be clear that they go, "Oh, well, actually, yeah, Deepak works in our development team or our marketing team. It's a different phone number. Let me transfer you." So it's but it's no good if the office manager doesn't know that relationship exists.
Yeah.
So everyone in the company's got to know that that your two businesses are aligned. So
perfect.
In terms of how it's worked for us historically, generally what has happened is that white labeled relationships have come with agencies where there was a development team, but there isn't anymore. And something that we all know from life agency world, where you have agencies and multiple founders, at some points, people go their different ways. Development teams stop, or marketing teams stop, whatever it is, or an agency decides that we don't make enough money we don't make enough profit on this part of the work. We're not managing it well enough. That's why we're scrapping it. And it becomes almost a point of embarrassment to the agency, or not, just something they don't want to highlight is the fact that they've shut down a division of their business. And that's normally where white labeled relationships have come in.
Okay.
That, or it's been a case that previously they serviced a client. Yeah, previously they serviced a client with an internal team, and it's better to just keep that illusion going. I'm trying to think if there's any other exceptions to that rule. Like I say, it's not a huge amount of our work that we do in that way anymore. The other way that it happened for us is that when we were starting off, what I did was shared an office with other agencies, with one other agency that then had various spin-offs. And so it was a relatively easy way of white labeling as well. We are literally in the same office and we can work with you. So there are lots of people who have agency offices that are shared between multiple agencies or share the same WeWork space, and it's one way of doing
relationships again, guys.
We are physically located together. Obviously, that doesn't really work in a lockdown. But unless you and your family have multiple agencies between you.
Understood. Look, I think there's a lot of great advice there, guys. I've clearly become invisible again for a second. Since I've started not shaving, it seems that my camera plays fun with me upon my background, so that's why you see me just turn on a bloody light again. So there you go. Hey ho, guys. I want to. We're coming into the last 13 to 15 minutes. Nick, I want to start whizzing through some of the great questions we got in the audience, and I want to go for some of the straightforward ones with the shorter answers to begin with before we go into some of the big ones. So Steve Miller, if you can find Steve Miller, Anton. So Steve Miller asks, relatively, let's say, straightforward question for you to answer, I believe, which is, when you bring on staff, are they mostly fixed salary, commission, or a combination?
Good question, Steve. So invariably, it's always been fixed salary, with the exception of sales staff or people involved in sales. So occasionally you will find it's a difficult job to hire for, is the sales and sales role, but it's useful to be able to offer some sort of commission structure around sales. But what we've found better in recent years is offering a commission structure across the team for any sales that they're involved in, because there are some people who do generate leads or personal network, and assisting with sales stuff, and it's useful to be able to reward them for that. So yeah, fixed salary has always been the way of doing it for us. Again, it depends internationally where you are in the world. Check the law that applies to you. In the UK, it's a pretty mercenary thing to say, and I'm lucky that it's never been part of my way of doing things. But there are companies that, you hire a person, you put them on a permanent salary. It doesn't really matter, because in the UK, you can let someone go within 2 years at basically no downside to the business. You don't owe them redundancy money.
Guys, Nick's doing pretty well for his first ever webinar, as Anton is highlighting. Sorry to flagrantly interrupt you, Nick, but I thought I'd share that with you. Guys, if you're enjoying this, please do subscribe.
Big orange banner.
Please do like or dislike if you're bored. But either way, engagement, of course, as they say, is good. I just found it quite funny that that Anton introduced to Nick's first webinar. So Nick, I'm so sorry that I blazingly interrupted you. I want to. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to finish and say, basically, my approach has always been hire the person. If you're confident that you want them to work for you, don't worry too much. I've never done the thing of, I'll put them on a 3-month contract or a 6-month contract. Generally, it's cheaper for the business to hire a permanent employee and put them in an office than it is to get a freelancer long term. And the risk is actually pretty minimal. Especially when you consider by the time you've grown your team a little bit, there'll always be a little bit of churn. You always basically need to be hiring or advertising yourself as a potential employer because you don't know what's going to happen the next week when your star employee might give in their notice. So you always need to be conscious of bringing people into the team. And I've found that employing people on permanent contracts has always worked for me. I've never used the strategy of, I've got them, I'll wait 23 months until I can just about get rid of them at no cost to me. Because if you're building a business that is growing, and that's what we're all trying to do, because if you don't grow, you just sit still and you actually go backwards. Hiring permanent staff has worked really well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, guys, what I got from that, which is quite powerful for me, is that the salaries work, and that having faith in the people that you invest in, whilst equally being aware that, of course, you don't know, at any given time your star employee can leave. But it does sound like, Nick's case, that, a lot of his employees that he's brought on, it has paid off and it has worked well. So I think that, that's, for me, great advice. And certainly I originally had some different ideas to Nick on this. And when I started Pearl Lemon, got people on shorter contracts and there was more churn, but really, I look at my business over the last 2 to 3 years, and I've got to say that, the people that are on salaries, we've got about seven or eight people on salaries and then a couple of contractors, but it is the people on salaries that, do great work. And I've chose to make that investment in them. So whilst originally I had a different, perhaps the cheaper, faster route, it was not cheaper, faster equals better, unfortunately, as much as I hoped it would be.
I've been lucky that I'd say on average employees stay with me for 2 to 2.5 years is pretty much the norm. We've had as long as 5 years, which in a business that's only been going 7 is pretty good. And it's sad, people who are fundamental do move on, and it's great. It is great when people. I had a leaver recently, and he'd come to me as his first job, and he left to take on his dream job. And you just go, that's brilliant that we've managed to do that, and that's a fantastic thing that that a company can offer someone is that growth and transition. And being able to kind of constantly reinvent yourself and ensure that you are bringing people in, even though it's evolving and. Right now it's not the easiest time to hire people, I guess, or have that much confidence in the growth of a business. To still have that mindset and be considering, well, I do need to be hiring soon, and I do have to ensure that we're ready to do so. And what are the processes and structure in doing so? But I think it comes back to an earlier point you made about how when you're scaling up from being one person to a company-wide structure, how do you transition them away from you personally delivering things or you personally being their point of contact? And if you build a team that isn't changing every 2 to 3 months, then people have a reason to come back to you that isn't just you. Sooner or later, they realize that it's another person in their team that they prefer working with than you, and you're forgotten about, and that's okay.
Well, let's you've said something quite timely, Nick. Let's hone in upon that period of transition, because Christina. It's brilliant that you said that. So, Anton, if you can find Christina Libal Mariconti, she is asking about a particular point of chaos, which is, and her question, if you can bring it back up again, Anton, brilliant, is any recommendations, and it's gone again, I'll read it out, no matter. Ultimately, Christina's concerned about managing client expectations for her agency while she's continuing to serve her current employer. So I'd love for you to offer some advice that you've got, Nick, to those periods of chaos, I guess. When you do find yourself.
Well, so I'm guessing from Christina's question that she's currently employed and starting something up as her side gig, and hoping to grow it. And that's tricky. I mean, look, we've all been there in the early days. You're working every hour that you're sent. And I found when I was at my absolute kind of most frantic, just before I took on staff, I pretty much got to a stage where there was an autoresponder on all emails that arrived with me, which just said, I can only check emails at this time due to just how busy I am. If it's urgent, please text me or call me, but please be aware things are incredibly busy. And people were actually really forgiving. They were like, okay, we do understand. I think it's a little harder when you're still employed by someone else. But I think if you schedule time in your day, it's like, well, I will look at emails before I start my day, at lunchtime, and after. I'll work around it. I don't think it would be very fair to hire a permanent employee for your business unless you were working for it full time yourself, because I don't think that you'd be able to offer enough support to a permanent employee, full time employee, if you weren't physically there or physically present all day. And certainly it's a really, really hard thing to do, the first hire, and you've got to be so nurturing and on top of it, because it is a big gamble. That first employee, you are spending what is your money effectively for the first time on someone else. And it's a big personal mindset change. But if you think it's going to happen without you being 100% on top of it, it's not. And the other thing to be aware of is when you hire someone, it doesn't get easier. It gets harder. Probably 3 to 6 months. It is harder, and you will be doing more work, not less.
So let's take these last 5 minutes, Nick, to rifle through some more of the questions that are coming in. So we've got 5 minutes, Nick. So what I'm going to ask of you is to answer each of them in 60 seconds or less. Let's go through them one by one. So guys, Hans Knapp is asking. It's a topical question, so let's definitely take it. So Hans is asking, Anton, if you can bring him up on screen. How much has the coronavirus crisis affected you, Nick?
Good question. It has probably reduced our retained and repeat work by about 50%, but it is starting to grow again. It stopped new business inquiries almost dead in their track for probably 6 weeks, and they're starting to pick up again. The challenge with the new business side is just trying to work out at what stage they will actually come in, and whether you need to scale your team to deliver them, especially because a number of the kind of new clients we work with nowadays are startups, and so it's all contingent on funding, and funding is all slowed down right now. So a lot of our clients we're waiting for, or potential new business, it's when the money arrives. So
let's very much reflected in. Sorry to cut in, Nick. I'm very mindful of the time now. Very reflective, by the way, everybody, of what I've been hearing from a lot of the other agency owners that we've had on this show. So I want to answer. So Cheyenne's asked a really good question. I don't know if you can answer this in 60 seconds, but try. So Cheyenne Govind has asked. So talking about scaling and bringing on new hires, how do you handle situations?
I'll answer that question straight away.
Go ahead.
If someone says, I need this and what you do, you go, here's my partner, my partner that I recommend that does this. And that's part of your partner development strategy, is that you're not only looking for people who will send you work, you are looking to send work to people when you have it.
Okay.
Brilliant. And that begets work.
So this goes back, guys, to the the referral only, that it's quid pro quo, that have partners aligned that you can send work to, because they'll send the work back in droves. So the other question that Sabiha, she's asking, Sabiha is going to be with us, by the way, in a couple of weeks, everybody. Sabiha is asking, how much time did you spend internally developing your new recruits? So how much time goes on the development of your team?
It's a really good question. I don't think I would ever say that I spent too much time developing them. I don't think it's possible to spend too much time developing them. And invariably, if things have gone wrong, fortunately, it's been very few occasions. It's always been as a result of not spending enough time with them. At the very bare minimum, they need to have someone who is their direct line manager. If it isn't you, they need to be making a lot of their time available, probably to the region of about I don't think that anyone should manage more than 5 people. So, and if you are managing 5 people, you're not going to get any actual work done other than manage those people. You can't be assigned other work. So base it on that relationship. If you've got 3 people working for you, you might have 40% of your time available. But if you've got 5, that's all you're doing. So use that sort of relationship. The other thing I would say is developing new recruits. At the very bare minimum, as an employer or as the senior person, meet with someone at the end of their first week, end of their second week, end of their first month, end of the second month, end of the third month, and then every 3 months, and just keep talking to them and have a process of running those reviews and finding out what's going well for them, how they're developing personally, what the company could be doing better.
Guys, I want to just repeat that quickly for the process. So never enough time to spend developing your recruits. If you're managing more than 5 people, probably all your time is spent managing your people, which probably defeats your ability to grow the business but they still need training. So that 1 in 5 or less ratio is super important. And Nick said he gave us a blueprint again. That's the second blueprint he's given us. He said end of week 1, end of week 2, end of week 3, end of week 4, end of months, and then move to every quarter after maybe 6 months in, presumably, maybe 4 or 5 months in. So Nick, that was really, really good advice. I'm going to finish up by asking you to briefly answer 2 more questions. And Josh, unfortunately, we're not going to take your question about LinkedIn outreach. We're going to focus on the other questions, but we will come back to you. I would recommend watching one of our LinkedIn videos, actually. Go to LinkedIn, go to YouTube, search LinkedIn views, and you'll find my video, actually, with SEMrush. So, Nick, I want to take Sabia's question. With the clients, are you giving clients credits or are you reducing contract terms? So what have you done?
Is that in relation to the COVID question?
Yes, exactly.
I'd say it's an opportunity to muck things up if you play hardball at this point in time. So any client who came forward and said, I need to put this on pause, it was just a flat, yes, fine, no problem whatsoever, we understand.
Completely.
So there's been no playing hardball, and what's happened so far is that most of the people who put things on pause have already come back and started putting things in place again once confidence has improved.
Brilliant. Guys, I can only agree with that. My experience of it has been the same. And what we're going to do from Mr. Brilliant. Yeah, no, Christina, you're welcome. Nick, amazing answer as ever. We're going to finish up with the final question, everybody, from Lee Scarf CA. It's a really good question. Do you still do one-to-ones, or do you delegate to your line manager?
Good question. So Lee and I have actually met. CA is Creative Armory. Good question, Lee. So I only do one-to-ones with people who I directly manage, who are within the sort of team leaders team of people that I'm responsible for. They do their one-to-ones with the people who work for them, but no one has more than 5 reports.
Okay.
More like 4 at the moment, I think.
Okay, so he still does them. No one has more than 5 reports. Lee, I hope that answers your question, sir. If it doesn't, shoot Nick afterwards. So, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Please do Google Nick Ellison, Google the Purr Group. If, of course, you want to reach out to Nick, he's going to be very easily found for both of those terms. Nick, thank you, buddy, for being on. It's you know, I still learn a lot. You know, every time I have someone on who's, you know, running a really successful agency, I learn a lot. And
yeah.
Everybody, for those of you who are watching, please do like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next show. So everybody, thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next webinar.
Thanks for having me, Deepak.